very quickly when it comes to data, hopefully not in good ways. But until now, we didn't know how many cases there actually were. So as part of a research project I've got with the University of Sydney, which is a PhD, we did a survey of all the veterinary clinics around Australia. It was around 2,200 vet clinics around Australia, or it was at the time of the survey. We literally ran every single clinic, and I had some volunteers to help with that, and I ran all the clinics myself. We had around 24% of the clinics in Australia who responded to the survey, and they've given us these results. So the first question we asked was to find out how big an issue the vets thought that it was, because that's a good place to start. So in this case, you can see two graphs here. The one on the left is the vets who don't see cases of Parvo, and on average, which is the red line, they thought maybe around 1,000 cases a year is what people thought there may have been. Vets who do see Parvo, you can see the numbers range quite a lot as to what their estimates were as to how many cases there are, but on average they thought it was around 4,000 cases as to how many cases they've seen. So the next question we asked was, okay, well, how much Parvo do you actually see in your clinic? And I'll show you a few different examples of how we've analysed this text. Around half of them didn't see Parvo at all, and the data we got was broadly representative. So even though we only got 24% of vets, they were distributed pretty much evenly around the country, so at least we know that we can extrapolate these results to the rest of the population, which is really good. But around half didn't see Parvo, which is good. Around half obviously did. 14% saw 1 to 2 cases, another 14% between 3 and 10, and so on. But 1% of vets, so 6 clinics, saw over 100 cases in a year, and I'll explain on this a bit more, but it's a lot of cases. If you split it up this way, you can see of the vets who saw Parvo, 62% saw between 1 and 10 cases, which was 500 or so cases a year that those ones saw. 14%, 11 to 20, 560. You can look at the numbers. In total, for starters, 6 clinics saw between 1 and 300 cases, and they alone saw over 1,000 cases of Parvo between the 6 clinics in Australia. And the total of this 24% of vets saw 4,219 cases of Parvo in 2016. So we're starting to see just how big this disease really is. And this is just doing the extrapolations around the States. We estimate, based on this data, 20,000 cases of Parvo occur every year, which is crazy, and there's far more than anyone thinks. And we can look at the distribution of cases, and this is just based on some mapping. We can see that this disease is all over Australia. Again, these are only the reported cases. I know there's areas where it hasn't been reported and therefore isn't shown on this map. But in particular, you can see these inland areas. The capital cities here there's some, but the large regional centres, is where it's a real problem. And this is something that we're beginning to be really cognizant of, how big an issue this is, and these are the areas we need to be targeting to try and fix this disease. We asked a lot of questions in the survey. I don't have time to show you all the data, but one question we did ask was the average percent of animals that were euthanized, either before they were treated, like basically euthanized just when they came in, or those that were euthanized despite the vet attempting treatment and then deciding that euthanasia was the best option. On average, 40% of Parvo cases get euthanized. So the other data that we know from previous research is around 10 to 20% will die from the disease directly. So in total, that's around 50% of cases. So of those 20,000 cases that we think we see, 10,000 puppies are dying every year from this disease, which is terrible. It's 10,000 families that are losing their puppies. It's countless heartbroken children. It just shows the enormity of this problem. So the question is, what can we do about it, and also how do we stop the disease? And so I'm going to talk about some of the risk factors next, and then we'll lead into what we're doing to try and stop this. So in terms of risk factors, most of this research comes from the disease surveillance system I created when I was working for Burbank Animal Health. It was called Disease Watchdog. Some of you guys may have heard from that. Some of you guys may have reported cases in. If you did, thanks very much. The system was closed last year because after I left this particular company, they couldn't keep resourcing it. They've started a new system which is Parvo specific, which is called Parvo Alert. That's coming online very soon. But we got a lot of good data from 2010 to 2017 when this first disease surveillance system operated. And some of the things we're going to talk about, which is the questions I get all the time. What kind of risks are there? Are there seasonal risks, geographic risks? I can talk about the socioeconomic risks when we have this data now. Risk of age, is there a risk of breed, and also weather risks. So in terms of seasonality, it's interesting. This is from one study that we published a few years ago, we're able to show that summer is the highest risk for death from parvo. But interestingly, autumn at the time of the survey across the whole of the country had more cases. And I think traditionally we recognise that going into this next period of spring and summer is usually when we know that we see a lot of cases, and I can see nodding heads in agreement. And certainly I'm hearing about outbreak cases that are occurring even now, and in the media probably seeing them as well. So summer definitely is one of the times when we see a lot of deaths. I think one of the reasons why the autumn cases came through, vets have told me that a lot of the really bad areas, they're too busy treating the cases to log the cases into the disease surveillance system. Hopefully the new system will counter for that. But what this does show is that parvo is an issue all year round. And obviously it depends on your area, and it is seasonal, which I can talk about as well. But you know, it's something that we need to be aware of. And if you haven't seen cases for a while, but you see something that looks like parvo, you've got to include it as your list of something that may be, because they are easy to miss if you're not thinking that maybe it's parvo. There's obviously other cases of gastroenteritis. A lot of things can cause vomiting, diarrhea. Obviously is one of the worst. Now, socioeconomics is interesting. We've been saying this for a long time. This is the first study in the world to actually prove that there's a link with socioeconomics. What we could show was that there was a high association with clustering of parvo cases, where there was a greater level of relative socioeconomic disadvantage. And this sort of proves there were strong findings, proves that there is this link. And I can show you some of the maps here as well. The blue areas are all areas where the parvo is, the black dots are where the clusters were, and every one of those black dots is a low socioeconomic area. So very high link between these issues. There's various reasons why we think this is occurring. Obviously, one of them being vaccination, lack of vaccination, affordability, and so on. We don't know for sure if that's the reason, but it's very likely to play a strong role. Obviously, one of the keys to trying to stop this disease is to make sure we can vaccinate the right puppies at the right place at the right time. The next thing we looked at was geographic risk, and again, this is paralleled in recent findings from the other data, but this is an older survey. This showed that there was twice as many parvo cases in the rural and remote areas as what there is in the urban centres. And again, there may be a link with socioeconomics there as well, because there is a lot of socioeconomic disadvantage in the rural areas. But again, it shows that this is a thing that we need to be focusing on. How do we stop these cases? One thing I know from personal experience is that sometimes we'll get cases which are being seeded from these regional remote areas into the capital cities. So as an example, and there's also feline parvo as well. I'm talking about the canine parvo. One of my colleagues, Vanessa Byers, who's a professor at Sydney University, is doing a lot of work with the feline parvo, and she's found that cases of feline parvo in Mildura have been transported to Melbourne by people looking to find homes for kittens, and then they've been sick and they've started cases of feline parvo, which has then become a huge deal in Melbourne, and the same thing happens in Sydney as well. So we need to be cognizant of moving patients that are potential carriers of disease, and certainly from those who work in some of the RSPCAs and things, Lewis used to talk about parvo puppies from Orange coming to Sydney. It happens all the time, but it's something that we know there's these issues. What can we do to try and stop this? That's always the back of my mind. So here's just some of the maps, just to show you again. This was earlier research, but you can see very similar distribution compared to the ones I just showed you. Across the whole of Australia, again, these regional areas. Obviously, this doesn't have quite as much data as the more recent stuff. And again, in New South Wales, in South East Queensland, you can see all of these areas where these cases are occurring. This is from the Visually Watchdog maps, but I have some more recent data as well. This is just to show that in the capital cities, there's also this geographic risk. In Sydney, we talk about that there's a western belt from Penrith down to Campbelltown, where most of the cases are seen. The blue dots, the dark blue dots, are the parvos in this one. And this is the more recent data from the survey from the other year. And again, this is Sydney, again looking at that western belt. The purples and the really dark blues are the higher cases of parvos. Campbelltown is blank because the Campbelltown vets didn't actually fill in the survey, but it's definitely a high risk area for parvo. If we look at Brizzy, some of you guys recognise some of these. I always used to say it was the southern belt from Ipswich across to Beenleigh, but I recognise now that there is a bit of a western and northern belt as well. And I think this parallels with the lower socioeconomic areas around Brizzy. I don't know if you guys would agree. And again, these are some of the hotspots that we see just around the capital city. But if we go to nationally, you can see the pinks and the dark purples are the really high parvo areas. And this is just the top 10, obviously, there's a lot more than the ones I've labelled. These are some of the really bad areas. These ones are literally seeing hundreds and hundreds of cases every year. So we start to know where these cases are occurring, and now that we know we're aware of this, because we've never been good at talking to each other before, and now that we have this data, we can start to look at tackling each of these areas individually. People talk about breed risk. This is from Disease Watchdog data. We were able to show that there was an increased risk with hounds and non-sporting dogs for mortality from Parvo. We couldn't specifically show that there was a link with black and tan breeds in the Rottweilers and so on. Some data from America has shown that there is that link in America. There may well be that link in Australia. I tend to think it's more likely to be around breed lines of animals rather than specific breeds. It might just be that there's some sort of familial immune suppression along particular lines of Rottweilers and things that might be causing susceptibility. We certainly couldn't find it in our particular data, but not saying that it's not there. Certainly, we are aware that there probably is an increased risk in some of the black and tan breeds. Weather is an interesting one, and again, anecdotally, a lot of people talk about we see the rain and then we see Parvo cases. And certainly our data was able to show that, so we've proven for the first time that there is a link between rainfall and Parvo. So rainfall in the same month, again, we're starting to see these rainfall cases now. It's very likely we're going to see an increase in the Parvo cases as a result. We also showed that there was an extended dry period also seemed to be a risk factor for Parvo. And again, I also hear that anecdotally from vets as well. We're not quite sure why either of these things occurs. There's a couple of working theories. One might be that as the extended dry period happens, the Parvo builds up in the environment, or that when the rainfall comes, it actually washes the Parvo from the outer areas into the towns. That's when the dogs are being exposed. I've also got a theory that possibly it's related to a co-infection with a parasite, and that maybe there's an increase in blooms as a result of rainfall, and that might cause. I don't know. We don't know. We're still looking into it, but certainly we've highlighted that there is an issue. If we can find out why, again, it's the way we can try and stop this disease. But it's fascinating that we're starting to get some of these risk factors that we didn't know before. So to summarise, we can show that there is a socio-economic risk, and obviously the geographic risk. We're going to talk about age in the next couple of slides, because there's definitely risk factors when it comes to age. Rainfall seems to be a risk, breed to a degree, and obviously seasonality is certainly based on individual areas. And again, some of the more recent research we're doing, we're delving into that. There's a lot more data I can share. There's only so much I can show you in half an hour. What I do want to do is talk briefly around testing for Parvo, just to show hands who tests for Parvo in their shelters and clinics. They're very good. Do you guys use like the SNAP test, the cage site SNAP test? Anyone use the PCR test? Do you send it to the lab for PCR? Nobody does? Very good. Okay, this will make this easier. The SNAP test is the best test to use. You can sort of ignore the slides. I talk a little bit about the PCR here as well, but the SNAP test actually has quite a good relationship between disease cases and positives. So if it's positive on the SNAP test, it probably is positive for disease. It's less likely that it's being interfered by vaccination. The PCR tests are very sensitive, but the vaccinations can interfere with the PCR tests. So if you're concerned that you're getting a positive and you think that one mightn't be positive, that it might be a false result, it is worth talking to the lab that provides the test. The reality is that even a faint positive probably is Parvo, because they actually design the tests so that the cutoff is at that level where if it was vaccinated recently or it's shedding the virus through prior vaccination, the test shouldn't detect it. So even a faint positive is probably still a real positive, and just treat them accordingly. But like I said earlier in the talk, one thing to remember is that in these cases, not all Parvo is going to be a fatal disease. So a lot of shelters will euthanize as soon as they get a positive result. And if the animal seems good and it seems healthy, but it's got some mild clinical signs, and you can quarantine it appropriately so it can't spread to somebody else, I'd encourage you to still consider treating it if you can handle that within your facility. We obviously don't want to encourage outbreaks, but I think a lot of puppies can be unnecessarily euthanized because they're tagged as Parvo. And you can survive Parvo, and they'll mount a really good immune response after being exposed to disease. So having a positive test isn't necessarily a death sentence, but if you are using the SNAP test, that is the right test to use to detect whether it's real Parvo. Right. So the last thing is around, we've got much time, 2 minutes ago, I think, is to around how to prevent vaccination failures. Now, I'll try and be fairly quick through this so we can have time for questions. But I get a lot of questions around vaccinating. Just another quick show of hands, who vaccinates on entry? Anyone vaccinate entry? Awesome, very good. And do you guys vaccinate puppies all the way through? Should show of hands, awesome, just show of hands. That's really good. I'm very happy to see that because that's what we need to do. This is just results to show, so again, these graphs, you can look at the how we're analysing it because there's two different ways to look at it. This is the age of presentation of disease. So this is looking at puppies, the age that they came into and presented to the vet with Parvo. So what you can see here is that, I think the take-home message here is that most cases of Parvo are in puppies. You can see 90% of cases are in puppies that are up to this 1 year age. But we do see some in adult dogs. So around 10% of cases actually do occur in adults. So don't think just because they're an older dog that they're not going to have Parvo. It is still possible, but obviously the much biggest risk is in puppies. And it is something we need to be aware of because I think the adult dogs often do go misdiagnosed. In fact, I know people ring me because they're surprised, but you do get cases in adult dogs. You can get cases in dogs that have been vaccinated as well. We do see vaccination failures. And that's also something to be aware of. Just because they've been vaccinated, it's not a guarantee. The vaccines work really well. They're 95 to 98% efficacy. You do get some breakdowns, and obviously when a vaccination fails, if we're in an at-risk area, that's when it gets tested. So it's just something to be aware of as well. Now, this is looking at the other way. So this is looking at the age that they were vaccinated when they then later presented with Parvo. And you can see here that this is when they had their last vaccination prior to presenting with disease at some stage later. So you can see here, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10 weeks. Probably isn't a surprise that these ones have failed. In these cases, we have what's called maternal antibodies. It's probably the biggest reason why vaccinations fail. So effectively, the mum gives them these temporary antibodies when they're born. That first bit of milk they have passes those antibodies on. They're really, really important. They need temporary protection. Those antibodies will only last for a few weeks, maybe a few months at most. As those antibodies go down, then we need to vaccinate them to be able to give them protection. While those antibodies exist, they actually block the vaccine from working. Does that make sense? So these failures are very likely to be caused by the fact that they had maternal antibodies that block the vaccination, and as a result, they didn't see it convert to the vaccine. They weren't then revaccinated, and they've been exposed to disease later on. But you can see these cases up to 16 weeks is when the vaccine should be working. There probably may still be some maternal antibodies, but this vaccination hasn't worked and they've later got disease. And the take-home message here is that if we give the last vaccination at 16 weeks or later, and that is the recommendation of the World Small Animal Veterinary Association Vaccination Guidelines Group, also the Australian Veterinary Association is also now making the same recommendation. But if you can give this last vaccination at 16 weeks, hopefully we can stop these cases from occurring. Because if they're later exposed, hopefully those ones aren't then going to catch Parvo again. And that's where if we're sending them home from the shelter, we need to make sure that we can be giving those vaccinations or reaffirming to the people adopting them they must get that last vaccination at 16 weeks, and possibly again at 6 to 12 months, just for those cases that have failed again. Then depending on their risk, you might revaccinate annually or every couple of years, depending on whether they're in a high risk environment or not. And if we can do that, then again we can try and stop these vaccination failures, stop them catching the disease, and stop them spreading it as well. I don't have too much time left, but this graph just shows you, we're talking here about the VDI, which is the vaccination to disease interval. It's very confusing, this graph, I don't think I've got time to explain it. But effectively, you can track the vaccination failures back down to, it seems to be the most of them were vaccinated around this time period. That's sort of the take-home message there as well. So, like I said, in terms of trying to stop Parvo, it is really important the age that we vaccinate. If we can do this last vaccination, we really can try and prevent them. In the shelters, if you guys are in shelters and you're not vaccinated on admission, but you are in a high-risk area, absolutely you have to be doing it. It's a way that we can try and guarantee the puppies are going to have immunity. And obviously, your control practices around separating animals when they're coming in to try and prevent them from being exposed or potentially spreading disease is really important. I think the last thing I want to say is that to stop Parvo, again, parallels to the earlier talk, it is a community effort. My belief is that Parvo is as much a social disease as it is a biological disease, and if we can tackle the social issues, then we can actually stop this disease occurring. Because the vaccines still work really well, we just need to vaccinate the right puppies at the right place at the right time, so they stop dying from this disease and they can stop spreading it as well. So when we are having Parvo cases, we need to not necessarily be shy of Parvo. It's one of those things that it does have a bit of a stigma. People tend to think of Parvo as being a taboo that reflects badly on a shelter. It's just a disease. something that we can tackle and we can stop. And if we're seeing cases, we've got to make people aware of it. We've got to communicate this with the media. We need to warn people that they need to be vaccinating in these particular areas. So that's the only way that we're going to be able to stop this. I've got a charity called Pause for Purpose that we co-founded a couple of years ago. What we're doing is working on strategies to try and actually vaccinate pets of people in these lower socioeconomic areas, provide free discounted vaccinations to actually try and stop this disease. We actually have our first project happening in Queensland as of this weekend, which is awesome. We're really excited that the first vaccination strategy is happening. All of the research around the Parvo tracking and things is part of the same project. And you know, the charity selling dog treats as a way of raising money and awareness for Parvo as well. So there's a lot of things we can do. This is just the beginning of it, but I believe this is a disease we can stop in Australia. I like to think that by 2025 we could have almost no cases of Parvo. I can't see why it's not possible. We're just going to start in one area, prove the model, and move it out. So these are all the groups that have been helping. Thanks obviously to RSPCA, who awarded the Animal Rights Scholarship last year for the Parvo research. All that money has gone towards travel costs and vaccination projects and things. And a lot of people are coming together to help, but it's a project that we're still working on. So if you guys want to be involved, send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Don't know if there's time for any questions, but if there is, about 3 minutes left, which is great. Last words, this is Eddie. He was a shelter pup that passed away in 2017. He's one of the 10,000 puppies that dies every year. And, you know, I'd like to work together and try and stop this disease, and I think we'll be hearing too. So thanks for hearing what I have to say, and hopefully we'll come back and give you some progress reports in the future. Thanks very much.